Well, this is it, the final week of our series that we have been calling In the Beginning. So I guess this is the end of the beginning. When we finish today, we will have completely begun. And just as a reminder, if you want to catch up on the message series, you can check us out on our past messages. Just simply go to our website. Looking back over the last few weeks, we walked through the creation stories. Even though the stories are not intended to be taken literally, we can learn truth from the text. God created everything from nothing. We see the ideal in Adam and Eve and in the garden, and we see the fall from the ideal in their sin. Just like Adam and Eve, we are called back into a relationship with God despite our sin. We hear the first hints about Jesus. Remember that word, proto-evangelicum, that I told about a couple of weeks ago? The first proclamation of the gospel. We heard about Cain and Abel, Noah and the ark, the Tower of Babel, all of them showing us a pattern of our fallen nature. We turn away, God brings us back time after time. We turn away, but God always brings us back. That's what we're talking about today. We turn away, God calls us back. God's love is unrelenting. He pursues us. He will not let us go. No matter what we do, his love never changes. That endless, unrelenting pursuit is God's desire to be in a covenant relationship with us. What is a covenant? It's a promise freely given and fully lived. Freely given means we are willing, that no one is forcing us. We have to make a choice. A fully lived means total commitment. There is a sacrifice and joy in fully living something out. One of the most obvious covenants in our world is marriage. Two people are freely giving vows to each other and full living those vows out. When it comes to marriage, a covenant is the formation of a new family. That's a great way of thinking about covenant, the forming of a family. God freely gives us the invitation to his family and asks us to be fully live in union with him. It's like a marriage. God is committed to us forever and asks us to commit to him forever. So our big idea of covenant in mind, we pick up the story today in a place that follows that same old pattern. We turn away, but God calls us back. Today we meet a person who made a covenant with God, and this person is the bridge from primeval history to the patriarchs. In the past 7 weeks, we've covered our primeval history in Genesis 1 to 11. From these chapters, we learn who made us and why. And though, as we've said, it's not a scientific account of what and when. Now, the patriarchs take us through the stories of the Israelites, the kings, and prophets. This morning, we will conclude our series with the patriarch who started it all in Genesis 12. That person is Abraham. We get plopped into the Abraham story before he even has the name Abraham. At first, he's just called Abram. Without much introduction, God tells Abram to go. The Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your land, your relatives, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. All the families of the earth will find blessing in you." To this point, Abram hasn't done anything to earn this promise from God. God freely gives Abram this promise. He is told to go, and God makes this promise to him that he will become the foundation of the covenant. Abram goes on a journey, which was dangerous at the time. From his homeland, his family, and his father to, well, we don't know where yet, but he just goes. That is probably a familiar feeling for many of us. You're going somewhere, trying to reach something, but you don't know quite where or what it is. That's the journey Abram is on. What Abram does know is God's promise, and it's three things God promises Abram: a great nation, a great name, and that he will be a blessing to all people. One more detail here. Abram is not young. He's 75 when he gets this call. He's been faithful for a lifetime already. He has a relationship with God, and he's been waiting on this moment with God for many, many years. But there's a lot of life left in Abram. After God calls, he travels a tremendous distance over decades with his wife Sarai and their large household. There are moments when he praises God by building an altar and giving thanks. And there are moments when he does not trust God's plan. He has an illegitimate child with his maid Hagar because he doesn't trust that God will provide an heir. Abram's faith, despite his mistakes all along the way, is always, always his greatest strength. Eventually, Abram gains a new name, Abraham, because he demonstrates an ongoing relationship with God. Ultimately, Abraham's journey leads to a pivotal moment. By this point, God has blessed Abraham, and Sarah. Sarai also gets a new name, with a son, despite their old age. It's through this son, Isaac, that God will seal his covenant with Abraham, and he will fulfill those three promises he made: a great nation, a great name, a blessing to all people. But it will take all of Abraham's faith to follow God's plan. We continue to read. Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test and said to him, "Abraham." "Ready," he replied. God calls out Abraham to Abraham, and Abraham faithfully and instantly replies, "Ready." Don't let the simplicity of Abraham's reply be lost. Without knowing what God is going to ask him, Abraham replies with one word: ready. No matter what's in store, Abraham is prepared because of his faith. He is ready, and he needs to be ready because it is going to be quite a test. Let's continue reading. Then God said, "Take your son Isaac, your only one, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you." This is a good place to pause and let God's request sink in. God asked Abraham to offer up his son as a burnt offering. How awful. It should give us a horrible sinking feeling. Any parent sitting here would reject this request immediately. It's your child. Is there anything more agonizing, more excruciating than losing your child? Than having to take the life of your own child? What kind of God would ask a parent to sacrifice their child? And it's not just a sacrifice for Abraham. It was for Isaac as well. Isaac wasn't a toddler or a little boy any longer. The context makes it clear that he was the one carrying the wood up Mount Moriah for the sacrificial fire. We should see Isaac as a young teenager. This was a death he freely accepted. He entered willingly into his sacrifice. There's an implicit question God is asking of Abraham and Isaac. Are you ready? Are you ready to undergo this sacrifice in order to restore blessing to all humanity? Are you, Father Abraham, ready to be part with your only begotten son? Are you, son Isaac, ready to die in obedience to your father out of love for God? Isaac and Abraham walk quietly up Mount Moriah and stand before God to make their reply. We are ready. What kind of God would ask this of someone? Only a God who was willing to do it himself. Does this sound familiar? The sacrifice of a son for the blessing of humanity, the wood being carried up a hill, the father's anguish, the son's willingness, the faith demanded from each of them. This is predicting what Jesus did at Calvary. We have the benefit of seeing the bigger picture, so we know where this is all headed. But in this moment, in Abraham and Isaac's moment, they don't have the advantage of seeing the bigger picture. They just trust. But just at the right moment, just a moment before the sacrifice is made, an angel appears and says to Abraham, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy," said the angel. "Do not do the least thing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you did not withhold from me your son, your only one." Much to their relief, Abraham and Isaac are spared. Instead, a ram nearby takes the place of Isaac. After Abraham makes the sacrifice, the angel returns and says, "I swear by myself that because you acted as you did in not withholding me, your son, your only one, I will bless you and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the gates of their enemies. And in your descendants, all the nations of the earth will find blessing because you obeyed my command." Here we see the covenant again. God is reminding Abraham of the promise freely given and now fully lived. Remember the three things God promised Abraham: a great nation, a great name, a blessing to all people. Something important for us to reflect on is that the measure of our life is not how much money we make, how much power we acquire, or how much prestige we build. The measure of our life is the love we freely give and fully live. That's why God promises Abraham what matters: relationships, respect, and the reward of blessing others. We know deep down somewhere this is what matters, but more often the measure we judge ourselves by is how much of a name we really want to make for ourselves. We want financial security, we want recognition, we want control, we want to keep up appearances. And we often forget about the covenant God is forever keeping with us, that his love freely given and fully lived, that even while we were still sinners, God sent us his one and only Son. If we want relationships, respect, and God's reward, we have to find our own Mount Moriah, like in Abraham's story. Our own mountaintop. Think about it. From the mountaintop, you are more or less alone with God. You can see much more clearly. It all looks smaller, and you can see everything in context with its surroundings. You can see what's most important and what's least important. You can feel closer to God on your mountaintop. That's why people describe strong religious feelings as a mountaintop experience. God wants to make a covenant with you and with me on a mountaintop. God is calling us back, offering us covenant, making us a family. And we can look at Abraham's example to know what to do. He shows us the importance of mountaintop moments. How can we have a mountaintop moment in the busyness of our lives? Pray and participate in the sacraments. Create a space where you are alone with God, where you gain a better perspective and see everything in context. For example, consider not hitting snooze on the alarm clock in the morning, and take those extra 10 minutes and dedicate to God them through prayer. Read Scripture daily, attend Eucharist when you can, partake in the Eucharist. And whether you're committing or for the first time or recommitting to prayer and cultivating that relationship with God is what helps us to live our side of the covenant, a promise freely given and fully lived. We will spend, as we know, a lifetime working on that fully lived part. As you pray, let me offer one final encouragement for your mountaintop moment. Abraham was 75 years preparing for what God had in store for him. He invested countless hours in prayer. He trusted God completely, so completely that when God called on him to be tested, Abraham didn't even have to know what the test would be before he said, "Ready." You will be tested as well. Relationships, respect, and God's reward don't always seem like enough. We all have crises: health, work, personal family. Your faith and relationship with God will be tested. But his covenant with us is the surest thing we know. Jesus freely gave and fully lived it to give us complete confidence that even without knowing what is before us, we can answer simply and confidently as Abraham did. If your life is full of mountaintop moments, that's when the covenant becomes clear. That's when we can hear God calling us back. That's when his love becomes our compass, and that's when his reward becomes enough. Find your mountaintop and find yourself ready.